welcome to another episode of the ContinuousX podcast, where we look to solve for X in the SDLC equation. Here with me is Mike Fitzurka, my co-host and colleague. And today's guest, we have Pete Chestna, North America's Chief Information Security Officer for Checkmarx. Hello, Pete.
Hey, how you doing, guys?
So in our format, Pete, we wanted to ask you a few questions, and the first one being, what are the biggest challenges you see in the public sector that agencies face as they transform their cultures to DevSecOps?
So from a practical standpoint, I think they're the same as everyone else's. In fact, there are places in the government space, such as the Army Software Factory, where if you look at their level of maturity, it's as good as anywhere in the world. There are parts of the government and the way things work, such as ATO or continuous ATO, that we're trying to drive towards that become a little more problematic. And it's really about changing the way you think about what thing are you trying to get that authority for,
right?
And where does the governance lie? So the fact that I'm changing code. So if we think about DevOps and it's small changes continuously. So I write some stuff, it goes to production. I write some stuff, goes to production. We think about that and trying to get ATO on that. Well, now we put humans in the way, and now we've got calendars in the way. But if we think about it in a different way, so classically, when I was in those DevSecOps transformations, convincing regulators and auditors that segregation of duty does apply to CI/CD because it's codified, it's checked in, I can give you an audit log of changes there. And if we agree that those tests are right and that the guardrails are strong and the controls work, then that's the place where the governance lies. And the fact that I've got peer review and security is looking at those things as they change, that's the separation of duty. Even though the computer is now making the decision, people have done and come and looked at what those things are. So if I think about continuous ATO, here's my change set. Here are the controls that I have in place that are automated. This is the thing we agree on. Not that the change in the software happened or what that change was, but the fact that there are very strong controls and tests that it has to go through before it gets into the production environment that are critical here. And that's probably the biggest thing that the government is struggling with and the public sector is struggling with is around that ATO.
I wholeheartedly agree, boy. I've talked about separation of duties and how that just needs to be automated. You need to be able to then turn and trust that. And that I think you've nailed it with the government has to wrap their mind around that and come to terms with that in terms of making it a continuous ATO process that wait a minute. So I'm not absolutely, you can still monitor a separation of duties. It's just now that you've put it in and you've added an automation element to it, and that's what's troublesome to try to get the brains wrapped around.
Yeah, I think the critical thing is what change needs to happen that has to go through that additional scrutiny, and if my pipelines are correct and strong. In fact, I'm using my one of my favorite mugs. It's called Tradition. Just because you've always done it that way doesn't mean it's not incredibly stupid. It's the thought that, look, what worked yesterday doesn't work today. And if we can agree that if I change the testing, the guardrails, the controls inside of the thing that moves software from developer to production, that's the thing that has to go under review. But the fact that code changes, guess what? Get over that because I got the right tests. I have the right tooling, et cetera, in place, and that the separation of duties and the ATO is around the change process and that pipeline to production and not the code that got changed.
And I think that's very important, Pete, that you touched on, especially from the security aspect, because not only getting that change in the first time, but reacting to vulnerabilities once they're discovered, because you don't know them until maybe they're already in production. So what is the remedy to getting a vulnerability patched as quickly as possible? And without a pipeline, it seems to be a mad scramble.
Yeah, it's not repeatable.
Right.
So you have no assurance that you can do it safely. You don't have strong testing in place, perhaps. And actually, this is again another place where the government is leading. If you look at the executive order, if you think about SBOMs as something that everyone is talking about now. They're talking about it because the government is talking about it, not because industry said, "Hey, we should have SBOMs everywhere." We're doing it because we're being told to. But those strong controls around that allow me to say, provided I haven't shipped anything new, I know what's in there, and if that something goes sour, then I know that I need to make a change. I need to take action. Or at least I need to start the incident to say, what are we going to do about this? And it might be nothing. It might be do it later or do it as soon as possible, or it might be do it now. But the fact that we are talking about SBOMs and we are delivering those in a structured fashion allows that shift right or that monitor right thing to happen properly.
Terrific. Thanks, Pete. And thanks to you listeners for this first question that we're going to ask Pete. And stay tuned as we talk about everything is code in our next episode, as we try to solve for X in the SDLC equation.